We have two sessions this morning on Taoism and one on Confucianism. The first session is actually no break between the two because we have to go to the University right after this. The first session on Taoism, we have Edmund and Christine who present the Taoist position, and then Austin is going to respond to that. And the second one would be the presentation is from Jonathan Chen, and the response is from anyway. Who's doing the response? Response comes from Colleen Gallagher. Colleen is here.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So without further ado, we will have the presentation. You have 15 minutes.
Yeah. We have our timer, so it's okay.
All right.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Once again, thank you very much for the invitation for both of us to share. And we're particularly impressed by the presentation, the discussion yesterday. Because of the shortage of time, we would like to very briefly to set the scene. We're very impressed with the guidelines of the forum for both authors that we can we need to demonstrate the core content of our topic. So we cannot have much time to explain it. The limitation of the paper is 10 pages, so it's a lot of struggling. And the methodology that we adopted is what we call the small treatment of big topic. It's in Chinese. So we would like to look at Taoism and ecology in the Chinese culture and wisdom tradition. So our methodology is to return to the original and to return to the core and turn complexity to simplicity. So the paper is divided into three parts to bring out the fundamental relationship of Taoism and ecology through a simple etymological reflection on the term Tao in the Chinese cultural tradition. The second is a condensed description of the essentials of ecology from the Taoist perspective. And the third is a brief discussion of Taoist ecology, including very briefly, the concept of integral ecology. And the simple etymological reflection, if we look at the base, one of the most comprehensive dictionaries of Chinese terms and words. For the term Tao, there are 13 categories with 39 usages. So we can divide it into two streams. One is the basic meaning of the term: road, path, rules, ethics, virtues, ethical rightness, system of thoughts, and methods. The second stream is about the schools, the Taoist thought and religion. The first is the school of thought. So we make it very clear that we're not using the term religious here. So the school of thought of Tao in the early spring and autumn period, which is around 770 to 221 BC. In fact, that's the period when we call the axial age, the first axial age. The second part is the Taoist religious organizations set up in 25 AD into around with the different affiliated associations. So we continue to explain the three basic important texts, classical texts of Taoism. One is Laozi, the other is Zhuangzi, and then Guanzi. But for Taoist, Tao is the formless and ineffable way of that is the wellspring of creative power for a universe of constant transformation. Tao is the mother of heaven and earth, and is the spontaneously self-generating life of the universe. Everything in the universe has its own virtue or power. That's the term De, which, if permitted to flourish, brings a natural order and harmony to the world. The enlightened ruler or sage can cultivate order and harmony within a small community by cultivating spontaneity in itself, by following a path of non-aggressive action, way, or non-action action. In Zhuangzi, the third classical text, the second classical text is Zhuangzi. Very strangely enough, it's not treated as a very important Taoist religious text, but it's philosophically a very important text. Talk about the perfected person, Zhiren. And the third influential classical text is Guanzi, which one of the major contributions is to that Guanzi integrate the Taoist philosophical thinking of Tao Te Ching with the then prevalent thinking of Yi Jing and Yin Yang Wu Xing teaching. And this one of the core is the concept of three treasures, which is Qi, the vital energy, Shen, vital spirit, and Jing, vital. When a life begins, the Tao confers beginnings. Heaven offers the Shen, and earth provides Jing. Heaven, earth, and human beings, according to Yi Jing, are the three main elements of these three Taos. And the concept of Zhiran is very important. Self-soul, or natural, spontaneous. The Tao Te Ching states human beings learn from the earth learns from heaven, the heaven learns from Tao, and the Tao learns from Zhiran. And sometimes the term Zhiran is translated as nature. Zhiran is another term for Tao. The Tao is the state of harmony between heaven, earth, and humans, is modeled after the state and the principle of Zhiran. And the historical origin of Taoism religion. So the origin of the Taoist religious thought and the activities of Fangzhi and Huang Lao teaching. Because of the shortage of time, I won't go to the details. The four periods of development of Taoist religion, the Taoism would be normally called Taoist philosophy. And then the classical period for the 2nd to 7th century, the formation period, and the classical to 19th century, the internal external alchemy, and the 19th century, the present, its decline and revival. Very quickly, the part 2, the essentials of ecology from the Taoist perspective. So following this etymological analysis, the Tao is the principle of the cosmos, is to be self-actualized creatively through the interaction between the three treasures in the human body, through the individual internal training and collective religious practice, external training. The harmony of human beings with the heaven and earth requires respect for the external world of nature. The second, following this second analysis, the essence to this harmony follows the process of the human first modeling the earth, and the earth modeling the heaven, and then lastly modeling Tao. And when this stage is reached, the Tao is simultaneously represents Zhiran. And the third is the actualization of Tao in a state of naturalness through the principle of Wu Wei, action as non-action, a state of creative harmony that emerges between humans, heavens, and earth, a harmony that has implications for the way we manage our societies and take care of our bodies. Already in modern time, Wu Wei means the balance between minimal effort and best result, free life, and minimal desire. The fourth analysis is the process of self-actualization and interconnectedness, because nature representing Tao is an overall context for and the environment within which the cultivation of humans and the natural world can take place. So quoting a very important Taoist scholar, James Miller, nature thus functions as a constituent part of Taoist religious culture. And it's defined and interpreted by it. In other words, there's no getting around the fact that nature is a cultural context construct. Taoist, like everyone else, does not value nature for its own intrinsic value, but rather for the value it has for them and for the communities. So very quickly, the statement of a very important contemporary Chinese Taoist representative, In his proper statement, he listed the uniqueness of Taoist religions. I will not go into this. And the second feature, and also what is new is it's following the traditional precepts requires of Taoists, observe the injunction against killing for amusement purposes, preserve and protect the harmonious relationship of all things with nature, establish paradises of immortals on earth, and pursue the practice of belief. And all these Taoist tradition, and especially the famous Taoist mountains, exemplars of systematic tasks of environmental engineering. So there are several major works of Taoist ecology in Chinese, and I don't think, because of shortage time, I think I would just select one or two. This is the research into the thinking of Taoist ecological ethics. The regulations and rules of Taoist ethics is following the Tao, the way, following nature, and its value of Wu Wei. Protective of life and not killing things, treating nature as father and mothers, and consciousness of the partnership with heaven, earth, myriads of things. And Taoist liturgy and religious practices bring out the spirit of ecology and demonstrate how Taoist practices live out the values in daily life. And the second book that I referred to is the study of Taoist ecological thought. It's a huge book. It talks about a concept of union between heaven and earth and humanity. Heaven and earth are parents, which are, which in fact mentioned earlier. The world of deities reflect this core value of harmony between human beings and nature. This is particularly of the religious part. Taoist ecology can be seen in terms of simplicity in life. This is about the life of Taoist ecology. In Taoist religious practices, internal alchemy, Taoist medicine, and Taoist vision of a dream habitat. So because of the shortage time, very quickly, this is an important slide. The simple overview, because Taoist and Taoist ecology should be served as seen as a cultural system, rather than just one particular school of thought, in religious thought in China, embracing a wide range of activities in lives of Chinese in the last 4,000 years. So the concept of yin yang and the yin yang wu xing, these are very important part of Chinese people's daily life. The third part, in fact, is some, I selected some brief, more important interpretation of Taoist. And I think the main thing is this is in a way a reshuffling, a repositioning of the Chinese Taoist or Chinese we call wisdom tradition vis-a-vis the European Enlightenment tradition, which label Taoism as a superstitious religion. So it's not just a religious organization, but a cultural system that may be relevant for providing critical edge over the dominant socio-political ordering of the time and enacting the place as a culture of sustainability. So what is important is the concept of flourishing of life. So James, this is a concept being promoted by a lot of scholars, Taoist scholars, this flourishing of life. So instead of talking about sustainability, they're talking about flourishing of life. And that's how the concept of integral ecology should be understood. And James Miller has promoted a very important concept about liquid ecology, bringing one of the main features of interpretation of Taoist philosophy and Taoist religion is about the internal and the body integration of body and mind. And this concept of integral landscape, porosity of the body, local imagination, and political ecology. So this will end with a very brief note about, that's why we prefer to translate the term integral ecology as Yuanrong, which is in fact is a very Chinese conventional term. So with this, I will end the presentation. Okay.
Edmund, as you know, in our workshop, we've only had in the past 12 years one other time we had a Taoist presentation, because of the fact that Taoism is very complex, as we said, and very few scholars can comment on Taoism and bioethics. So we're lucky to have these experts who's able to explain to us and clarify to us some of these Taoist concepts. Awesome has been given an awesome task to respond to Taoism, which is probably quite foreign to his background or his training. I think he rose up to the challenge. And now the floor is yours.
Sure. I think I can share my screen once you stop sharing your screen. The rest is clock and line.
Admin has to remove the.
Yeah, I can't.
Can you stop sharing, Edmund?
Yes, you stop sharing. You stop sharing.
Okay.
Stop sharing.
Okay.
All right, let me now attempt. Let's see. You all see the presentation? Just give me a thumbs up. It's all good. Yes. Okay. All right. Well, it is really my loss to not be with this amazing group of individuals this time around, but I hope to be able to give you some of thoughts on this great paper that I had the privilege to read. You all know a little bit about my background, but I'm presently, I work as an emergency medicine physician. I have some religious training, so I do some bioethics work from an Islamic perspective, and I do empirical and social scientific research. I won't bring that all together, but I'm informed to this conversation with all those different sort of multiple hybridities that I bring. So I want to orient us for a few minutes or for a few seconds, really, then get into the topic. So we're at this 8th UNESCO workshop on bioethics and multicultural religion. And this project has been one where we're going through various articles within the UNESCO's Declaration of Human Rights and Bioethics and Human Rights. These were the articles that were debated and talked about to provide the grounding for our conversation. The theme of the conversation is about religious perspectives and bioethics, right? With a particular notion of that we potentially want to arrive at how we might protect the environment, the biosphere, and biodiversity. And in my reflection on the paper, I note that is this really a goal or is it a conversation? And we should think about that, right? Because the language we're using, even in the theme of this conference or this workshop, suggests an end in mind. And we should be cognizant of that while we engage the topic. So the methodology talks about us engaging in a conversation around worlds, moral worlds, local and global. And this is an interesting photograph here of a chart of the world of various moral traditions. I want to bring your attention to one aspect of it, if I can do so correctly. Let's see. I zoom in, and I want you to look at this emblems of what the world looked like, right? Savage, barbarous, right? Half civilized and civilized. This is not too long ago. When we would engage in cross-civilizational dialogue, we would think of others as savages or half civilized and ourselves and our traditions as civilized. But our methodology is one where we engage in others' worlds, not thinking about them as uncivilized or savage, but rather as plural traditions, a different way to access truths around the world. So I want us to bring that we've moved beyond this idea of labeling individuals, but sometimes we still do that in the language we use. So a term that I've used for several years, and this borrowed from Raymond Paniker, is the idea of homomorphic equivalence, right? These are functional equivalencies or deep correspondences that go beyond simple analogy, but they can kind of be linked between words and concepts that are across different traditions, right? So these serve functions within traditions in an authentic way. They look like what is serving a similar function in another tradition, but they're not the same, right? And so I'm going to now draw a map from an Islamic perspective onto the concepts and terms that were brought up by the two speakers. So one of the analogies one of the metaphors that was used in this paper, and when I was trying to make sense of it, was around a path or a road, right? Or the way in Mandalorian language, right? So Taoism thinks about the Tao as a path of, to, right? Or emerging from righteous conduct or harmony. And in Islam, we have a similar metaphor about the Sharia, right? Which is literally the way to the water being the source of life. And so this is a path that individuals should follow so that they are going to be ones of righteous conduct and lead to felicity at the end, right? So they function similarly in the two traditions. The outcome of that path or following Tao, right, is harmony, or it emerges from harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity, as you just heard. And in the Islamic tradition, a concept, right, a vehicle, a term that carries that meaning is salam, which means peace, but it means much more than peace, right? It means a sense of order and harmony within internal and the external. And what supplies you need to be on this sort of journey, and I can't say that word very well, zilan, however you say it, but naturalness, right, emerges. So that in an Islamic sort of notion of the path, the supply that you need to be on that path, and the Quran says, that the best of provisions is the provision of taqwa, God consciousness. Here marks one simple difference, right? In the cosmological schema, you see that now here we have introduced this notion of God and being observant, that God is observing you, right? So that is the best provision to be on the path to having righteous conduct, to then attain felicity. And what are the processes by which you can gain this sort of harmony or the outcome from the being on the path? And as you heard from our scholars, there's action, non-action, religious rituals and techniques that one does in the Taoism. Within Islam, you would have three essential processes, right, in large categories. Iman, meaning belief, right, a system of beliefs, creedal sort of beliefs. Islam, in this case, meaning the external actions one does, following the commandments or prohibitions of the Islamic law. And ihsan, meaning the inner cultivation of virtue and realizing that it is God who sees you, though you might not see him. So acting in that sense of ihsan means in the presence of God. Those are the processes by which one can gain not only adequate knowledge and understanding of the path, not only how to be on the path and emulate that, but then can get the outcome of being on that path, right? Eternal felicity. So I found this was an interesting metaphor that they brought out, and it resonates with my own tradition. But the cosmological notion in that tradition seems a bit different than the one I'm used to, which also sets up different ecological duties. And one of my big questions that I have for this group here relates to that. So they spoke about the Ji, Shen, and Jing. I'm bastardizing those words. I apologize, but right, the notions of earth, right, and heaven, and the human being, the being a composite of endowments from these two different parts of the cosmos, right? And that the Tao itself and the different three Taos come together for a harmony, but the Tao itself is the principal substance of cosmos, that they're interconnected, and that harmony requires each system, as you just heard, to be in a process of order, right? And emulating one another, and the rings get larger, so the entire cosmos is in order. They're codependent. Yet they make a striking comment in their paper that nature, and they did here in the presentation, is of instrumental value only in that tradition, which suggests to me that that tradition, like other traditions, might have a strong inclination towards anthropocentrism. I would like to hear more about that in the Q&A. I will say that, you know, in the Islamic tradition, sorry I missed the slide there, but in the Islamic tradition, we have a very different ontology, and a clear divine line is between the realm of the creator. In this case, this is one example of the cosmology, Lahut, and everything else, creation, right? And in this simplified schema, you have Malakut, three different levels of existence, right? World of spirits, of forms and similitudes, and of corporal bodies underneath that schema. So, and then there's different levels of accessibility to truths and within and knowledge within these domains. But the point here is that there is a very hierarchical schema. It is not as connected circles, but rather a clear pyramidal structure of cosmology with access to that divine, right, essence being very limited, if at all. So the Islamic tradition therefore can't admit a pantheistic account, as you heard David talking about yesterday. But we also recognize then the creator creates the creation, that creation serves his, you know, God's purposes, among which is the welfare in this world and the next. And this is clearly stated, and I'm going to share a few verses of the Quran as I took the lead from Lise DeBall. And so now I'm going to do a little bit of hermeneutical exercises for all of us here, thinking strictly from scriptural reasoning from the text itself of the Quran. So you see here this verse, that do you think, meaning mankind, that you were created without purpose, right? This is one of the verses that indicates that everything has a purpose. God has purposes for you, for creation, for nature, for everything else. So the question then becomes now, in the time that remaining to address this, which right way does the Islamic tradition, in my reading, right, go towards anthropocentrism or ecologism, and the definitions being there for you to look at. We all know this by this time. I will sort of say that we should note at the outset in the ontological schema the cosmological schema that I presented, that humankind is the most noble of creation amongst the creation. Al-ashraf al-makhluqat, as we're told, right, the pinnacle of creation. And with respect to creation, there's an interesting relationship, which is also talked about by Zita Ball's paper, that with respect to creation, God uses this term in the Quran, khulafa, right, the singular being khalifa, that mankind is given in this relationship, this caretaking stewardship or responsibility, as in this verse here, that it is He, وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَكُمْ خَلَائِفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ, right, that He is the one, هُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَكُمْ خَلَائِفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ, that He is the one who's put you as khalifas, as stewards in the earth. And that I've highlighted here that's the successors in the English translation, but that term means a lot of things, including one who follows, and you'll see my commentary talk about that a bit. But that's the relationship between mankind and God, in a sense, in creation, that God has put creation there, but mankind has a stewardship responsibility. And how does that come about? So the other term that I spoke about in my commentary was this term sakhara. And I'm going to now spend a few verses, show you, and I want you to think about what the indicators are from the Quran around this relationship between God, nature, humanity, and the purpose, God's purposes, to lead to the question of whether it's more anthropocentric or not. So here are two verses from the same chapter in the Quran, and it's Surah Ibrahim. And I'm going to highlight for you the Arabic here, and I want you to look at this construction, right? So the Arabic is وَسَخَّرَ لَكُمْ. That is the phrase I want you to look at for a second, which means, right, in the English, that He has put in service for you. Sakhara, in service, or subjugated. I mean, again, a whole array of meanings. Lakum, for you. So the verse, the first top one says, well, it is Allah who has created the heavens and the earth, right? And He sends down the rain from the sky, and He brings out fruit from the earth. I'm reading the Arabic, but you can see the English translation, right? As sustenance for you. And He has made for you the ships in the sea that sail, right, by His command. And He has given to, and He's also subjugated for you the rivers. Then the next verse continues saying, subjugated for you the shams, the sun and the moon, wal-qamara da'ibain, right, orbiting constantly, and that He has also subjugated for you the layla wa nahar, night and day. So the cosmological scheme, all of it, right, from the earth to the heavens now has been subjugated, lakum, for you, being mankind. And I'm going to continue on this sort of line. Then you see several, 2 chapters later, the same terminology is deployed. وَهُوَ الَّذِي, and He is the one, سَخَّرَ الْبَحْرَ, that has sakhara, the same world, has word subjugated for you, the sea, right, from which you take out seafood, tender seafood, right, and so on and so forth. Then now again, talking about the earth, you move to and the end of the verse, which I have highlighted here, for what purpose? وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, so that you might be amongst those who perchance show gratitude. So now you have the subjugation of the cosmos for a purpose. God's purpose for mankind is that by seeing all these things, not only the fact He has done it, but then you are grateful. Another verse in the Quran, a few chapters later, again uses the same terminology, sakhara lakum. Now here the construction is Allah sakhara lakum. God has subjugated for you, clearly put together, right? What comes after the earth and the ships in the sea by His command, and so on and so forth. Again, reflecting on the same. A few more verses, same thing. Allah, now you see the construction coming together. God, Allah, sakhara lakum, has subjugated for you what? Samawat, the heavens and the earth, right? And whatever is on the heavens and the earth, and has given to you or put upon you, yes, He has put upon you the favors. I got your time. I'm almost done. There's 2 slides. Same construction comes in another verse, sakhalakum, right? The sea and the ships, and then again in the end, the heavens and the earth. My point being that this construction is used throughout the Quran in many verses And the purpose that you get at the end of this verse, وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, so that you might be grateful. So the relationship then becomes God has created creation, right? Of creation is humankind. And what is the purposes of all of this? That first, by seeing ayat as, right, they are indicants of God's existence, you're aware that God is the one who's created this cosmos. You then have this attitude of gratitude towards him for creating the cosmos for you in a certain way and putting it in a certain order for you. And because of that, you are then morally culpable for its caretaking. That's how it comes about. Again, creation serves his purposes, not ours, among which is human welfare in this world and the next. Nature reflects humankind's actions, right, for a purpose. I'll share the verses in a second, but it is really a canvas of communication between the creator and the created for us to reflect upon. So this verse at the end, this is my last slide, we're done. So ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر, that you see fasad, right? Fitna, the term here is what? Corruption, I think that's the English here. In the land and the sea, بما كسبت أيدي الناس, because of what your hands have brought forth, ليذيقوا بعض الذي عملوا لعلهم يرجعون, so that you might taste of some of which you have wrought, right? And therefore, لعلهم, so perhaps you might return to God. So the tapestry, the canvas of communication, when things are going wrong in the world, is for you, mankind, to reflect of what you have done, but the purpose is to return to God, right? So I will leave us there with my presentation, and I'm happy to take some questions around that. Thank you.
Awesome. So can you hear me? Someone was saying that there's a lot of echo.
You sound distant, but if we can hear you, I think.
Should I speak from there? Or I mean, it's the same problem with how come this is not working? Is it working, or is it projecting to that?
Yeah, it's projecting to the speaker, and
the speakers are back to here.
no, this is absorbing the sound from us to connect to this Zoom, and then this is projecting in the speakers to the audience.
And then they get the ambient sound.
Yeah. So either we
okay.
we can turn this down.
Turn it down.
Yeah, I can give you
Turn it down. So anyway, unless I speak over here, but then they can hear me. What's the best way?
I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Yeah, you can hear me, but I mean, they have an echo. They can.
So I think it's okay, Father Tim.
That is where you are is fine. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, should we do this?
Yes, that's very good.
Okay, so any questions or response from within the panel? Like, let's say, does Edmund or Christine has anything to say?
Yeah, maybe I take this opportunity to thank Father Tim for this challenging work. You know, as mentioned, it's because personally, I studied Taoism when I was in college, and we practiced, in fact, Taoist religion for a while. So, but it's, I think the whole thing, the whole concept of Taoist religion and Taoist philosophy are so embedded in Chinese culture. I think this brings back to the very nice paper that Ansem provided us a few days ago. Because the point that he mentioned, I would very briefly explain. You know, the question that he raised about the comments that Professor or Dr. James Miller wrote in his two very important books. One is Introduction of Taoism. The other is Green Religion. That's why he, that's the place where he used the that I cited his comment about the instrumental element of this cultural construct of Taoism. But I think, in a way, it's I would say cited incompletely because of the limitation of the length of this paper. Because it the point that Anson raised exactly revealed one of the core characteristics of Chinese culture or wisdom tradition, or especially Taoist and Confucius and Taoist philosophy or religion, is the union between heaven, earth, and humanity. So, by placing humanity against something else, against heaven, against earth, in fact, is contrary or against this basic principle of integral. That's why we towards the end, we brought up this concept of integral ecology, translated the term integral, translated as yuanrong. So because this dualism or dualistic concept, influenced by the Enlightenment or the Greek-Roman tradition, the Enlightenment mentalities, that anthropology, anthrocentric and ecocentric, in fact, they are opposing each other. That's really against the basic principle of Taoism, because if you understand the concept of Tai Chi or Wu Ji, the positive and negative elements, in fact, they're moving together. They're always in a dynamic circle. So this is the basic concept. We cannot use a dualistic or this basic contradiction or between the positive and negative, the things like that to explain Taoist ecology. The second point to explain this understanding is what I emphasize, or we emphasize, that Taoist ecology or Taoist religion or philosophy has to be understood as a cultural system. In fact, I prepared some slides from my own family. I've been using ethnographic approach to talk about Chinese wisdom tradition or comparative wisdom tradition. Is the concept of daily life, or daily life, spirituality of daily life, that Taoist elements of culture influence every aspect of Chinese life. For example, my father was a Taoist doctor. In fact, he practiced Taoist religion together with Buddhism and Confucianism. And my mother was a Buddhist, and I was educated by the Jesuits and by the Confucian. So in our family, all these are integrated in our daily life. So this is, that's why we practice Tai Chi, and we practice Taoist and Buddhist meditation and Christian, a nation, and Christian meditation together. The third point that Einstein brought up very, very clearly, in fact, which is very important, is about the purpose, the concept of purpose. The purpose, the concept of purpose in Taoist ecology, Taoist religion and philosophy can be understood in two aspects. One is that the basic concept, in fact, is everything is together, everything is connected. In fact, it's dynamically or synergetically integrated or put together. But at the same time, Chinese culture is very pragmatic because it influences daily life. So for especially for what we call popular religion or popular religious practices, they are very practical. They are very instrumental. I think this aspect of the purpose has come out, but maybe from a different perspective. Okay, these are some of the basic comments or feedback to Anselm's very clear description of Islam. I think we're very impressed with the comparison, especially the first few slides. Okay, thank you very much.
May I add one point, this is Christine. In fact, on the paper, maybe at the last few page, we talk about integral human development, taught by or advocated by Pope Francis. This concept, basically, because I'm researching on integral human development, is about everything is connected. So whether theological, social, economical, political, or personal level, developmental level, but it was started from we care about the marginalized, the lost, the least, the lost, etc. But then this integral human development in terms of connecting with nature, ecology, connecting. We just actually also organized the integral aging conference in Hong Kong from Bioethics Center. This is about life, about work, about everything. So I think it's very connected with related to the Taoist ecology. This integral, there's like the Buddhists talk about in a dark room, when all the lights light up, it's become one light. Every light cannot be neglected. So like our human being, our nature, our everything cannot be neglected. So just want to add one point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, can I just might I have a second there? So I just want to understand fully, and it's potentially it's because I don't fully understand, right? So what I was trying to respond to and pick up is that if we are all connected, right, and there's a structure by which we have to recognize that not only are we connected, we're codependent is a term that I use. And that leads to certain types of duties, right? That it is important, not only important, it's imperative, right? That we don't disrupt the balance amongst us, right? Because we will both then suffer, right? Or all three, or if we're all intermingled, right? Then the whole thing will suffer. That sets like a level playing field for all of us, right? So there's no hierarchy where one needs to be privileged of the other. And what I was trying to get at was it seemed that within your paper, or not, I mean, you were quoting, Professor Miller, that although the whole system suggests that there is no hierarchy, there was a line that suggested that maybe there is a hierarchy, right? Or the way I was interpreting it because of the words that were used, right? That there's an instrumental value, which means there's an instrument for someone else, right? An instrument by itself is a neutral thing. It can be used for good or bad, right? But it has to be used, right? And I'm using that word purposefully. So that was throwing me off in the flow of your paper, and I still don't quite get what you're getting at, because if we're flat, if it's flat, then it's flat. There's no hierarchy. But if there is an instrumentalization, there's someone has to instrumentalize something else. Someone has to use something else, right? And that sets up a different hierarchy of priorities when you are in areas of not surplus, right? And that's where the ethics is, right? You can't maximize everything.
I think that's why I think it's difficult to really, I think the job to provide a very simple but may turn out to be very simplistic exposition and analysis of Taoist, because Taoism by itself is, the whole controversy of whether Taoism is a philosophy, a religion, and all these, and Taoism, as I said, is a cultural system that I live my life. I'm 70 some years old now. It's all in our daily life. And definitely can look at it from different perspective, and there is a hierarchy, of course. The hierarchy. That's why the Tao say the human being will model after the earth, and earth after the heaven after Chiran. It's so there is a hierarchy, but at the same time, it's the cosmos. It's within our body. That's why James Miller's contribution is very impressive. He really caught the essence of Taoism in daily life, because my as a family of 4-generation Chinese medical doctors, we fully understand what this concept of body as a liquid ecology, because everything is a flow. So if you look at that concept, then there is no hierarchy. The head is more important than the leg. It's not. It doesn't work like that, because it's a flow. So the concept of union between heaven and earth, and to heaven, earth, and human beings, and all the because the Taoist also has all these 180 precepts, forbidding the Taoist priests or the practitioners to harm nature. So this because we can really look at it from different perspectives. But I think for for you're right with this pointing out that James Miller is in fact has his weak points, but because it's not academic according to a academic conference on Taoism. Otherwise, it would be much easier to explain. But you're correct. You're correct to point it out. I think I felt uncomfortable with it, but still, he has brought up a point which can be explained.
Thank you.
Okay, let's open up to the floor. A lot of questions from Chris, and then Paul, and then David, and then Lucita.
Thank you both. Professor Patela, I have one question for you.
Oh.
Now, from your presentation, it appears that God has created man and the nature, but the nature is subjugated to man, and man has got right to use nature, because heaven and earth and the entire cosmos has been created for the man. Now, the point is that everything in the nature is divine because it has been created by God. And the time of creation, God does not discriminate. But from your presentation, it appears that the value of the man is intrinsic, while the value of the rest of the objects is instrumental. Now, as per Hinduism, in our philosophy, in our religious philosophy, since everything in the nature is divine, the relationship between the nature and the man is subject-subject relationship, not the subject and object relationship. And if we treat the rest of the things except the man as objects and assign them merely the instrumental value, man develops an inherent right to use them as per his desires and as per his requirements. And that goes contrary to the interest of the environment. So it is necessary that everything in the nature is considered on equal footing. So don't you think that the concept which you elaborated goes contrary to the very needs and philosophy of environmental protection? Thank you.
Father Tam, am I supposed to respond to that first?
Sure. Yeah, it's actually an easy answer.
It's an easy answer. Well, maybe you can answer it. So this is right. This is a dialogue and discourse of authentic traditions, right? So we want to present our understandings of traditions in an authentic manner, which is why I started off the conversation saying the theme of the conference is protecting the environment, biosphere, and biodiversity. Perhaps that shouldn't be the end goal we all have to reach at. The end goal might be that we need to understand how we think about the relationship between mankind, humankind, cosmos, and nature to have something that potentially affects a homeomorphic equivalence. And the idea that one is now responsible to God for his or her actions provides, right, a similar check upon the actions one takes. We do not need to flatten the earth and say that divinity lies everywhere, as a pantheistic account, nor do we need to say that it is equal to me, but rather we are all equally distant from God in a certain sense on a cosmological plane, because we are all creation, he is creator, and all of us will be held account to get him. Therefore, I, as one who is meaning human beings, who is given a measure of responsibility, all right, or an honored status to be able to have subjugation of other creatures to me, must now have a higher level of accountability for that, right? With great power comes great responsibility. Mm-hmm. So I do not believe that we need to go that route that you're suggesting to protect the environment. And I'm trying to draw that distinction from the available material that we have, because I think it is a gut romantic notion and a popular position that we need to go there. And I dispute that from within my own tradition. So you've picked up on what I'm saying, but I disagree with that notion that we must go there, or that Islam is against environmental protectors. I would say that's an overreach and overstep. But within the cosmological schema and the ontological realms that we have other mechanisms to check the disasters that man wrought, because, as I said, that is reflected to us as a canvas of communication between God and mankind. You will see, right, facade in the earth. You will see corruption in the earth by what your hands have wrought, but we want you to turn back to God, right, to see what you've done. And I'll say that if you think about the traditions, the Abrahamic traditions, oftentimes nature was used for that purpose. The miracles that came were involved in natural, breaking the natural schema, right? Or locusts were sent to the children of Israel, right? Again, showing you what is happening to go back to God and to understand your own servitude and humility before Him. So anyway, I don't want to get more on the pedestal than I need to be. Hopefully that suffices.
Chris?
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, my question was going to be related to what Kishore said. So that little intervention was not as the cut in the line actually set me up well. So thank you, because my question had to do with the value of nature, right? This idea of protection, and it's I have questions for both sets of speakers, right? One is in Taoism, if we are indeed supposed to protect the environment, if there's that assumption, how does Wu Wei fit into that schema? The passive, active, passive, non-action, action, doesn't that seem to detract from activism being taken to protect biodiversity itself? So there's that question. Because I was a little taken aback by the idea of nature being instrumentally valuable as well from the Taoist perspective. And I'm not an expert by any means, but I've studied some Taoism in the past. And for Asim, the idea of subjugation, can the Arabic term, can we find another hermeneutic to use, right? Yesterday's conversation, which you missed, David and I were speaking about Qada in the Jewish tradition. In Genesis, domination is not just domination, it's responsibility for. You seem to be suggesting something similar. And I'm asking this in light of how you opened the presentation with cross-cultural encounters used to be, we're great, the others are savage, we need to tame them, subjugate them, tame them, right, and reform them. Do you think, can we find a new hermeneutic? Arabic is a rich language. Is there another way we can translate that term or begin to think about that? Because even within Islam and other traditions, subjugation of women fell under, got reinterpreted. Subjugation of other peoples has been reinterpreted. What if it is the case that we will get to other species and say, well, they're different from us, but we no longer have to speak of them as lower, right? We don't look at our children and say, oh, they're not as smart as us, but I'm going to tame them, subjugate them, dominate children, right? So I want to know about the hermeneutic. Can we move away from the subjugation language? Thank you.
Okay. Any response?
Very quickly, the point about protection is well taken. That brings out the core meaning of the concept of Wu Wei. Because in Taoist ecology or Taoism, nature is in fact has its own way. That's why the humanities should learn from earth from heaven from the Tao. From Tao in fact is 自然. That we if we do some, I think that's also the point that Anselm brought up about instrumentalism. That's because the concept of instrumentalism has to be understood in a more daily life perspective or in a more practical Taoist religious practice perspective. But in Taoism per se, Wu Wei non-action is a warning against human action, harming the nature. So that if you do not do anything, this non-action action is in fact has to be understood also as in an ecological or interrelated way. By taking human actions, they will harm nature. So that's why it's, you know, or at least on the surface, the translation of the term 自然 you know, has a deeper, you know, has a broader, provides a broader context for the understanding of Wu Wei non-action. So the, you know, that there's the by not taking unnecessary, with a very simple way of presenting it or explaining it, by not unnecessarily taking action, you know, or taking human action, the nature will be protected. So I think that's a you know, in a way that's the dynamics.
Awesome.
All right. Okay. So thanks, Chris. All right. So let's go back to the verses, and I'm gonna get to your point. So you have in the construction, Allah, God, the name of the term sakhara lakum, subjugated for you. Who's the one doing the subjugation? God, the one who is the owner of the cosmos and the universe and the creator, and nothing like unto him, who has total dominion over anything. So the term sakhara is not mankind is subjugating whatever, or these things, but rather it is God who is subjugating rivers and whatever, using that term. So it's the first put in the proper context of the verses that the doer, the agent, is not humankind, and nor is the responsibility towards creation that mankind, humankind, subjugated. Right? So all the other examples that you gave have nothing to do with what we're talking about, because that term, which is what I'm trying to get, if you're going to do a hermeneutical scriptural reasoning, let's look at the term and understand the vehicle that it is for different meanings, and then the agent and what God is saying, right? For what purpose? So that you return. So it is all a circular thing, that God has done this for you so that you might then be grateful to whom? To God. And then the relationship, as my colleague said, Lucy Tamal, and I quoted the verse that she did, and I want to go repeat what she said, that what is mankind towards the rest of creation? The term that was used there, and the only two terms in Arabic that I put in my paper, right, really, this term was khulafa. You are the successors, the followers, the adherents, the caretakers of, right? And again, all those meanings are set up there. So the term doesn't apply to mankind's role at all. So that is one way to dismiss your concern, because that term was not used for us. It was God doing something to his creation that he has total dominion over. And yes, we can say that there's many different ways to interpret sakhara, but what I don't want to do is to be not using a certain meaning, because it is one that we a priori say can be part of the conversation. It should be true to the texts, to the vehicle, the fuller range of meanings that term used, right, or carries, sorry. And so that's why I did that. So maybe that answers your question, Chris. I want to say one more thing, that it's not humankind. So I want to remind ourselves that in the Islamic schema, it is not only humankind that is morally culpable and responsible, right? But there are other creations as well, the jinn being one of them, right? For example, that have similar responsibilities, and maybe not in the same way. We don't know how we can write much about that, but the Quran addresses both man and jinn, saying that we have created both you, jinn and ins, illa liya'buduni, or liya'budun, when you cut it off at the end of the verse, so that you might worship me, God says. So we both have this relationship towards God that we have to turn back to him. We're responsible for our actions, though, you know, they might have a different way of doing that.
Okay, sorry. There are many questions. I think Paul is the next one.
Yes, thank you for your paper, and especially speaking to both Edmund and Christine here. Thank you for your paper, especially the notion of Wu Wei non-action, which is something that I'm pondering. But I have a more specific question. My simple understanding is that Taoism is primarily about human individuals and society itself achieving harmony. And I'm trying to understand where the application of Taoism to ecology came in, whether that is ancient or new. And just to add to that, there are commentators who say that the major religions, including those of India, need to rediscover resources within their own religions in order to apply them to ecology. And your paper specifically says that, refers to 3 studies which were published in the first decade of the 21st century, which apply Taoist notions to ecology. So in simple terms, do you agree that Taoism needs to be refashioned or is in the process of being refashioned to apply to the ecology, or were those notions there from ancient times?
Very quickly, very good question. In fact, in a way, it reviews maybe some basic misunderstanding of Taoism or Taoist religion or Taoist philosophy, or even in fact Chinese way of life, because because of limitation of the length of this paper, not much, we didn't have much room to explain how Taoism influenced daily life of Chinese in the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. It's a very important component of Chinese wisdom tradition and nature, because ecology is a term that did not appear to Chinese wisdom tradition until the 19th century or even 20th century. The term philosophy did not appear until the mid-19th or end of 19th century. So the Taoism, in fact, brings out a very important part of Chinese culture, this union between nature and humanity. And the concept of 自然, naturalness is essential, because Tao is natural, is naturalness, which means it also brings back to the point about protecting, because humanity is fully integrated with the cosmos. You use this term cosmos. That we are part of it, and that's why we need to protect it. And it's in fact it's protection of human body, just like you're talking about the COVID situation in Hong Kong in the last two or 3 years, or also in China. We used traditional Chinese medicine to cure, to provide cure for the COVID patients after they got sick. And there are a lot of ecological or what called medical meaning to it. That's why yesterday Mr. Hang's speech about local knowledge is so important, because local knowledge represents local wisdom, and local wisdom has to be understood in its own historical context. That's why our paper pointed out at the beginning, in fact the slides that we brought up earlier, the 2 key directions. One is methodology, and the other is context. So if we need to be careful with the methodology that we're using for this kind of hermeneutical discussion, and also the context that we're using. And Taoism becomes in fact the most important element in Chinese popular religion. It's everywhere. And we talk about weather, we talk about how the environment of our room, our household design, all this, they're part of the system. So I think that's why it's in a way, if we put it in this context, in this cultural wisdom context, the term refashioned, it in fact is out of order.
Okay, we have time for one last question. David, you're next.
Thank you for both presentations.
We need your mic.
No. Thank you for both presentations. I enjoyed them. I have a general question, which I think could be productive for our general discussion as well. I wonder, what do we mean by harming nature? I think it's an interesting test case for the question we are seeking about the nature of value of nature, and also what do we mean by protection of nature, because protection is needed whenever there's a harm or damage. Now, I think we can damage our car, but we cannot harm our car. And I wonder how do we do the analogy to nature. I'm not sure we can harm nature. And if we can harm nature rather than just damage it, what are the standards? This is the particular question that interests me. What are the standards according to which judge whether a human activity is considered a damage or a harm to nature and which is not? And I find here just two strategies or two options. One is human-based standards. We decide, we, the masters of nature, are masters in the sense that our values or our standards decide which is damage and which is not. Or the other one is divine standards. I mean that when God created nature, he had a certain view of how it should work. And whenever someone intervenes, that's considered damage. So I'm not sure we have any access to divine standards. We have only access to our own standards. So that's my problem.
I think it's a very important, because of the shortage of time, it's a very, very important point that John brought up. This exactly also corresponds to the essentials of Taoism, because the standard is not human. The standard is nature. Because if we look at the paper that we presented, human beings learn from earth, learn from heaven, learn from Tao. And Tao, in fact, this standard is an integrated standard that with nature, heaven, earth, and then humanity. So this is a in a way, that's why we cannot just simplistically use the or accept the interpretation of James Miller about the instrumentalism. The instrumentalism aspect, or harming or hurting or damaging part, is pretty much on the actual practical daily, say for example, the rituals or the precepts forbidding the Taoist practitioners or the Taoist priest to do certain things. That's in a way that would be more aligned with the concept of damaging. But harming nature is a separate thing. For it would be a much higher level, and it goes to the core of the Taoist religions of philosophy, that the basic value of everything is with nature. That's why we should not do too much. Wu Wei is action on action, and in fact by artificially or manipulatively using resources, natural resources, against this basic principle. So I think you brought a very good point. So by dividing human and divine is in a way is not too Taoist, because it's in a way it's an ecological system.
It's kind of like the seventh year, letting it grow.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's very similar.
The seventh year is
It's a type of
in
Wu
my
Wei.
opinion,
Yeah,
it's a human standard. Right?
Right.
We need to cultivate the land,
Right.
not that we harm
Right.
the land if we over-cultivate it. We harm ourselves, because the land will become infertile. So
Okay.
that's
Okay.
So my
Yeah.
so my response to that, David, I really enjoy your philosophical background, because you bring the issue to the fore, right? Which this is really important, what you just sort of said, and it's similar to what I made a comment yesterday, whether nature is neutral or not. So to answer your question very briefly, the standard for us is always God, right? Through the revelation as a primary source. Our knowledge is limited, and you have to differentiate amongst creation. So there are, for us, souls, right? Different types of souls, animals. There's some traditions that talk about animals being in heaven and so on and so forth. I think some of this is referenced within Ms. Ball's paper. So there is not just one, everything's the same, but there's even further hierarchies amongst creation. And on the day of judgment, right, you can separate them. So the non-living creation will testify against mankind. So if I walk too haughtily on the land will say, this person walked haughtily upon me, and God, you recompense them for that, right? Or, so that's non-living in our sense, right? Non-souled. Or the crane or the crow that I threw a rock at will say, take recompense from him. He threw a rock at me and did something else, but that's a soul, potentially different type of soul being. So we must have a different, but who is the standard? What's the standard? It's God. Some will petition God as, you know, they harmed me. Some will say this is his own thing. There's a problem that they walk this way. It's against your commandments. So then God, you decide what the recompense for that would be. Now, protection, you mentioned the term protection and harm. So I do think there is harm. That's the answer, right? But different categories within creation. Protection, and I'm glad that others didn't go there. So a lot of times we wrapped up when you talk about Islamic ethics, talk about hifz, which is protection. But actually the term is preservation. So if this had been a conference that I termed out as a preservation of nature, hifz, not protection of nature, right? Which makes more sense within an Islamic cosmos, that you preserve what God has endowed, what capacity has given, the order that God made, right? As opposed to this protection responsibility, which is different. So the term for us would have been preservation of cosmos and the environment, the biosphere, because then we're talking about how God created that, right? Because he.
Thank you for the time. Also, thank you for the thank the workshop for inviting me to this important conference. I'm Jonathan Chan. What I'm going to present is a Confucian view on the Article 17 of the UNESCO Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. Okay, I start now. What I'm going to do is to summarize my paper. The first part, the Earth is now facing a number of environmental problems which calls for international efforts to tackle them, such as efforts of fleshing out international norms to regulate environmentally devastating activities. Article 17 represents such an effort. My paper discusses the moral position of the article and makes some response to it from a Confucian perspective. The article does not stand alone. It should be read together with other articles of the Declaration, such as Articles 2 and 3. Article 2 states clearly the aims of the Declaration, and Article 3 advocates two ethical principles. The first principle is concerned with respect for human dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms. I call this the principle of respect for human rights. The second principle is about the priority of the interests and welfare of the individual over the sole interest of society or science or society. I call this the principle of the priority of the individual. Article 17 is to be understood against background to inform two articles. The second section of my paper discusses the ethical implication of the Article 17. I take the article to imply the following normative claims in the context of protecting the environment, the biosphere, and biodiversity. I will not go into details of these four claims. I will go back to this later. C1 to C4, together with the principle of respect for human rights and the principle of the priority of the individual, constitute a general ethical framework which provides the international community with a normative basis for developing environmental principles and obligations. C1 to C4 should not be read in isolation. They are not separate, but inextricably intertwined. Evidently, appropriate access and utilization of biological and genetic resources and the role of human beings in the protection of the environment are interdependent. We may explain the human role in the protection of the environment in terms of appropriate access and utilization of biological and genetic resources and vice versa. Also, both the appropriate access and utilization of biological and genetic resources and the human role in the protection of the environment depend on how we see the mutual relation between humans and other forms of life as well as how we value traditional knowledge. C1 implies that some sort of mutual connection between human beings and other forms of life exists, and that appropriate considerations be given to this connection. The paper discusses the connection in question from both a scientific perspective and ethical perspective, but I will skip the scientific part here. The ethical part is about how the relation is to be evaluated, which in turn depends on the values that other forms of life have. There are two kinds of value which we can accord to them. To humans, other living organisms may have either instrumental value or intrinsic value. Evidently, other living organisms have instrumental value to humans. The question is whether these other living organisms also have value in themselves. There are three views about the answer to this question. The first is anthropocentrism. The second one is biocentric extensionism. The third one is environmental holism. I will not go into details about these three notions. I suppose we are quite familiar with them. If you have any problem with this, we will go back to this in the discussion session. The declaration does not tell which views should be adopted. From the perspective of the declaration, either one is acceptable. Anthropocentrism accords no moral standing to non-human entities. Sorry. But that does not prevent people from having moral obligations to protect the environment. We may establish such moral obligation by appealing to human interests or welfare as people's environmentally devastating activities will harm their interests. Biocentric extensionism are called moral standing to non-human living entities that will give humans stronger moral reason to constrain their environmentally devastating activities. Human interests do not always prevail when the interests of human beings clash with the interests of non-human living entities. Environmental holism extends moral standing to holistic entities such as ecosystems or the earth. That will give human even stronger reason to constrain their environmentally devastating activities. Of course, it remains to be seen how extensionism and environmental holism determine what we should do in the cases of clashes of interest. Appropriate consideration should be given to the, C2 requires that our use of the biological and genetic resources be appropriate. But how to determine whether a certain use of resources in question is appropriate or not? In my view, this amounts to ask how to set limits to the use of the biological and genetic resources, such that any use of the resources beyond the limit is deemed to be inappropriate. From the perspective of the declaration, the determination of such a limit is the function of the consideration of the following. First, the human rights principles. Second, the moral standing of non-human living entities and the holistic entities. Third, the value of traditional knowledge. C3 requires that some degree of respect be given to traditional knowledge. I think I will, because of the shortage of time, I will skip this part. In this part, I asked two questions. What is traditional knowledge, and why does traditional knowledge matter? And also discuss the constraints we have when we are using this principle. There are some other articles, for example, Article 12, Article 20, and Article 16 are also relevant for our discussion, but I would also like to skip them. Now, I go to the third part of my presentation. In section 3, the paper discusses the ethical positions of Article 17 from a Confucian perspective. For the Confucian, C1 from C1 to C4 are all acceptable. According to our analysis above, C1 implies two claims. C1A, there is some sort of mutual connection between human beings and other forms of life. C1B, appropriate considerations to be given to this connection. The Confucian would agree to both C1A and C1B. But how would the Confucian consider the relation between humans and other forms of life? And how would he or she consider the moral significance of the relation in question? Wang Yangming, a great Confucian master of the Ming Dynasty, make the following statements regarding the human nature relation. This passage succinctly summarizes the doctrine of the unity of heaven and the human, an important metaphysical doctrine of Confucianism. According to this doctrine, human beings and all things, including the natural world, form a unity just like different parts of an individual joined together to form one body. This doctrine provides a metaphysical basis for the virtue of friend that requires us to extend our moral concern to all things in nature. Consider what the great Song Dynasty Confucian master Zhang Zai said in his masterpiece, the Western inscription. Heaven is my father and earth is my mother. And even such a small creature as I find an intimate place in their midst. Therefore, that which fills the universe I regard as my body, and that which directs the universe I consider my nature. All people are my brothers and sisters, and all things are my companion. It is clear from the above passage that the doctrine of the unity of heaven and the human is not merely a metaphysical doctrine, but doctrine has two aspects, the metaphysical and the ethical. The metaphysical aspects reveals the place of humans and their relation to other entities in the universe, whereas the ethical aspects prescribes what attitudes people should have towards others. From the perspective of the doctrine, our relationship with nature cannot be merely instrumental. Thus, for the Confucian, anthropocentrism is unacceptable. This is because non-human living entities and holistic entities have not only instrumental value, but also intrinsic values. Thus, the Confucian would accept the ethical position of extensionism and even that of environmental holism. But there is a question that the Confucian needs to answer. What is the relation between the metaphysical and the ethical aspect of the doctrine? The claims of the metaphysical aspects are about facts, whereas the claims of the ethical aspects about value. Obviously, there is a gap between fact and value. Then the question is, from the fact that humans are an integral part of nature, how could we infer that we should extend moral standing to other entities? The Confucian's answer to the above question lies in the notion of the self. The Confucian draws a distinction between the large self and the small self. The self of a person is the subject that the person refers to when he is thinking about himself or identifying. This is more clear. The self of a person is the subject that the person refers to when he is thinking about himself or identifying himself. This is the concept of self I would like to put forward. For the Confucian, the self of a person is a small self if he limits the scope to his self, of his self to his physical self. The self of wider self, when he identifies himself with a wider scope of things in the universe. A person has a large self when he identifies himself with all things in the universe. Consider a passage from Mencius. Mencius says, all things are already complete in us. There is no greater delight than to be conscious of sincerity on self-examination. If one acts with a vigorous effort at the law of reciprocity, when he seeks for the realization of perfect virtue, nothing can be closer than this approximation to it. For Mencius, all things are already in us. Our recognition of that fact transforms the self in us into a last self. We recognize this self by enlarging ourselves to include all things. But when we enlarge ourselves, we are able to act with a rigorous effort at the law of reciprocity and approximate to realizing the perfect virtue. Right? From this perspective, the metaphysical and the ethical are the two sides of the same coin. And it is a logical consequence of the doctrine of the unity of heaven and man that we ought to extend moral standing to other entities in the universe. As Mencius says, there is no part of himself which a man does not love, and as he loves all, so he must not notice all. There is not an inch of skin which he does not love, and so there is not an inch of skin which he will not notice. Since there is no part of himself which a man does not love, and all things in the universe are parts of ourselves, just like our skin is a part of ourselves, it is natural to expect that we love them. Thus, we have a good reason to extend our moral concern to them. There remain questions which the Confucian need to address. Firstly, if we accord moral standing to all things, how could we formulate any meaningful moral obligations? We need to walk, eat, shelter, and clothe ourselves. All these human activities will cause destruction to the natural world. Do we not have obligation to the things we destruct? Could I pull out a weed in my garden because I want to make my garden pretty? If I am forbidden from doing so, isn't this ethical position incredibly demanding? Well, there are two different strategies which the Confucian can use to reply to the above query. The first one is to adopt a position of general equality that all living and holistic entities are equal, and principles that tell when humans' environmentally destructive actions are permissible. I will skip this part because I don't think the Confucian will accept this approach. The second strategy is to adopt a hierarchical framework by drawing a distinction between moral standing and moral significance. According to this strategy, we could recognize the moral standing of all entities, but accord them different moral significance. In my view, the Confucian will adopt this strategy. I would like to know how much time do I have?
Your time is over.
Then I think I can finish here. I think the Confucian would accept the second strategy. And I would like to answer questions.
As a response from Colleen.
I want to say thank you, Jonathan, for your paper. I was most interested in the very first parts of the paper, where you talked about a few different aspects. Sorry, we're changing these. Okay.
Now you have to put it process.
So I was fascinated when you got into the aspects of environmental holism in particular, as well as talking about consumers, producers, and decomposers, because that was a different perspective than anything that I had seen in the other papers. So I thought that was very interesting. But what I did in my paper was to start off with looking at what you read and the parts from Article 17, where we divided into the 4 parts, right? Because one of them is the idea of the completeness of other forms of life and that kind of thing. And it relates to something you just said that was in your paper, that you talked about completeness. And so we talked about that, and I have an example related to that later. The access to appropriate utilization of biological and genetic resources. I think it's interesting that in most of the papers, it was stayed away from in terms of the genetic part of that. And I work in a world where genetics is very important, and there's a lot of work being done in that subject, and it's very practical for today's world. So I found that just something that I had to comment on. So I have some in my paper about that. The idea of the traditional knowledge aspects, and so I'll address that a little bit from a Catholic perspective and some of what we see there. And certainly the idea of the role of human beings in this process of protection. And I think similar to one of the other questions raised, are we there to protect or are we to serve? Just a question that I raised. Jonathan, you talked about the idea of no moral standing to non-human entities, both in the anthropomorphism and the biocentric extensionism that you talk about. I find it interesting that you use the term extensionism to a word that most people just use biocentric. So I found that was interesting. And that you have for both of those first 2 categories, that there's no moral standing to non-human entities. And so I think that's one of the distinctions that you make when you talk about the difference between moral standing and significance. Because I think some of the things that we often forget, and I'm reflecting now about some of our conversation yesterday and into today, about the fact that, what does dominion mean? What is our role as human beings? We see the world from our point of view. We can't see it from the point of view of a tsetse fly. So how do we do that? How do we protect what we don't understand? So I thought that was interesting, this idea of significance rather than standing. The idea of being consumers, producers, or decomposers. I'll be honest and say I really hadn't thought about the decomposing part, so I'm going to have to add to my paper a little bit. Because one of the things that came to my mind is that we as humans, one of the things as a Catholic person is we have a prayer that that is said, that comes from scripture on Ash Wednesday, a day that we remember our own sinfulness, our own failings, and our hopes for the future, of our forgiveness and the future. And it is the phrase, from dust you came and from dust you shall return. And that's an element of decomposition. Right? We go through that process. And I don't know that we reflect on that. So I'm gonna have to add that to my paper. That's a new thought based on our conversation. So I want to acknowledge that. You use particularly Articles 12, 20, and 16 to discuss Article 17. So I think the idea of the interconnectedness of things is present in the way that you use those, which is very good. And I think based on our discussions thus far, that's a very common thing that we're looking at overall. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis gives us these words to indicate that humans need to understand the interconnectedness and remind us of intrinsic value of all forms of life, more akin to what Jan calls environmental holism. These are the words. This sister now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the good with which God has endowed her. We have come to see ourselves, her lords and masters, entitled to plunder her at will. The violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is also neglected in the symptoms of sickness evident in the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. This is why the earth herself, burdened and laid waste, is among the most abandoned and maltreated of our poor. She groans in travail. We have forgotten that we ourselves are dust of the earth. Our very bodies are made of her elements. We breathe her air and we receive life and refreshment from her waters. And that's toward the beginning of the document. It's paragraph 2. And I think we sometimes forget as human beings that we are nature. And I don't know that it's a matter of not having hierarchies, because I think as humans, as I said, we all see things from our perspective, and we see things as things for our use and abilities. So I think there is a hierarchy that we place. I don't know that God placed it, but we do. Okay. And so I think that that's an important perspective for us to be reminded of, that we talk about human nature. We forget that we have a nature of our own, and we are part of nature as a whole. So I think that that's something that we have to continually remind ourselves of in a variety of ways. But as a Catholic person, I also have to acknowledge that Jesus is the new covenant. We think about Paul's letter to the Galatians, where he talks about the fruits of the Holy Spirit and how those imbibe in us the ability to do so much and to have a different understanding and to participate in the world. That's a new part of the new covenant that we have, that Jesus has provided for us. In Colossians 2, it actually says that Jesus is the firstborn of the new creation and gives his spirit to renew then the whole earth. So having heard what was said from the Jewish tradition, from some of the older traditions, about what it is to be on the earth and to do things. I think reminding myself as a Catholic person that there's a new covenant, a new way to see things. We have to live with the old, we have to understand it, we have to learn from it, which has to do with the part of, I think, Article 17, where it talks about we have to learn and understand from wisdom, right? We have to know what's there. But also recognize that we live on a new earth, we have a new covenant. When I think about that respect for traditional knowledge and the subject of environment, I think one of the first things that happens for many, many people is they think of St. Francis and his canticle of brother sun and sister moon, where he also talks about brother wind and air, sister water, brother fire, sister mother earth, because that's a few centuries old now, but we forget that that's still young in terms of the existence of the world. But it's important to know that as a Catholic person, we rely on what our saints have recalled for us. We learn from that tradition. But also looking at traditional knowledge coming from another aspect, I think about Saint Kateri Tekakwitha, known as the Lily of the Mohawks. She is the patroness of the environment. And so we look to that, and she's known for her daily reflections of how God is found in nature and the respectfulness that nature requires of us. And so I just want to open that up a little bit, and I did so in my paper. Then shifting to the idea of the importance of appropriate access and utilization of biological and genetic resources. It talks about the impact of life sciences on future generations, including genetic constitution, should be given due respect. And in my paper, I give examples of how we may or may not be doing very well at that at the moment. So if we think about most recently some of the COVID vaccine questions about should we be messing with genetics through mRNA or not, those kind of questions. And I don't want to get into a political debate about that, but I think just the scientific elements of we're doing things differently and we're using genetic ways to do that. And some people don't like that idea and others do. Also, that same idea of mRNA work, as well as other genetic work, is being used in the field of cancer treatment extensively. And how that's growing like within the last year even, because of the mRNA vaccines and what was discovered there. And that affects a lot of science. And I think we're understanding that science and religion are not always opposed to each other, but we have to recognize that, you know, science is a part of it. And I haven't heard a lot about science talk while we've been here on these couple of days, but I think that we do have to acknowledge that that's part of what we're talking about here. And then even simple things like, do we eat genetically modified food or not? Right? I remember having an argument with my sister about, you know, strawberries and how they were grown. And I talked about how they're genetically modified to look like this. And she's like, oh, no, they grow naturally. And whenever I said, no. And then talked about bananas. And she was like, you don't know what you're talking about. And I said, well, I know a little, not a lot, but a little. So we think about, you know, those kinds of elements and that idea of the biological and genetic resources. What are we as humans choosing to do as individuals, but certainly as whole societies going for our good? We are going to do something genetically. And that takes me to Jonathan Chan's statement earlier about completeness. And I didn't tell this in my paper, but I do mention about completeness. But if I'm thinking about a part-time in my life when I worked with people who were mentally and physically challenged and lived with them, and is part of doing that, you learn your own experiences of your own limitations and your own changing abilities. And we often forget as humans to treat people who are different from us, who may be able to complete. And I think that relates to, like, I was having a conversation with some students this summer, and one of the subjects that they wanted to study was about genetic enhancement. And we were having a discussion about, was utilizing the technology of CRISPR-Cas9 going to be something that was going to enhance the human experience or not? And what did that look like? And they thought that enhancement would only be pertaining to the idea of, we're going to make humans better, we're going to have more abilities to do things. But when I talked about the idea of completeness, so are you saying, I said this to one of the students, that so-and-so, actually a person who works on the same floor in our office building, who's in a wheelchair, I said, are you saying that because she has to be in a wheelchair because she's missing a leg, that she is not a complete person? And this young man got very upset with me. I said, what's a way to think about, what are we giving people access to? What is our understanding of a biological being and whether it is complete or not? So I have a couple of lines about that kind of situation in my paper as well as an example. But I think that part of this is to look at these things through the lens both of the spiritual elements that we are, and the way that our religious traditions and our cultural traditions teach us, but also to remember how these things get applied. Right, so similar to John's talk the other day where he said, you know, well, let's look at waste in the world of medicine and those kinds of questions. It's a practical thing. So you can tell I'm an applied ethicist, I'm a clinical ethicist most of the time. So I'm a practical person. I like to think about the how do you apply it part. And so I think I've talked about some of those ideas in the paper about how the application of some of these ideas, not just stating that they're ideas that come from the philosophical and cultural and religious perspectives. The last piece is to look at the role of human beings in the protection of the environment, the biosphere, and biodiversity, if you read Article 17. And so a few words about that from a Catholic perspective. In 2016, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops wrote a statement called Global Climate Change, a plea for dialogue, prudence, and the common good. And in that particular paper, they really go into the virtues of prudence and stewardship and solidarity. and how each of those calls us to have a different understanding of what common good is and how to steward things well, how to not just utilize them, but care for them. And the idea of solidarity with the poor, because our earth itself is poor. We ourselves as human beings have levels of poverty within us and in our understanding. And how do we put those together? And how that might possibly then turn into public policy. They do talk about that. And as a reminder, and they also remind us that Pope Benedict XVI in 2010 wrote, if we are to build true peace, how can we separate or even set at odds the protection of the environment and the protection of life? Thank you.
So, okay, we have half an hour, we have to go. So, questions? Okay, Jonathan wrote a paper on Confucianism. I think we have here Professor Fan Wei-ping as well. He's also Confucianism. There might be some questions about this paper. Unfortunately, Colleen's paper was lost in the cyberspace.
Cyberspace, yes.
Cyberspace, I don't know. So I never got it, and she said she can send it for some reason. So anyway, hopefully we get it later. So anyway, this panel is about Confucianism overall. So if there are any questions about Jonathan's paper and how he approached this topic, so basically, I need to. Let's go first. It's Samir. So, you have a mic?
My question was more general.
Samir.
You want me to go ahead? Well, actually, it was more of a generic comment because I think we had the question from David in the last session and the themes that Colleen has brought up just now, which I think are good themes to think about and reflect upon together, which is, damage versus harm. What criteria can we use when we're talking about, respect for the environment, care for the environment, reverence for the environment? Sometimes we tend to stay at the level, of very generic, nice sounding principles. But when you actually get down to the practice, the sort of things that Colleen was talking about, well, where do we draw the line and what sort of criteria can we use in concrete, and what do our religious traditions say about those boundaries, right? And I don't have any clear answers. I just thought that's a really good topic to reflect upon, because otherwise everything, stays at very nice principles where more or less all of us are in agreement, more or less. When it gets down to the nitty gritty, should we genetically modify fruits? And those sort of questions, the vaccine, so I just wanted to open it up. I don't know if this is the best time to reflect on that, but I think that's a really good point that has come up this morning, and I think we should talk about it.
So what are it? And then David, and then
so thank you, because
use the mic, please.
It's a direct follow-up to what you just said. Colleen, thank you for bringing up science, and my day job is the bioethics of genetics. So when you started on that, I was in my comfort zone. I want to make a comment that is harsh and honest. And it's true that in a meeting like this, it's wonderful to spend the first day kind of clarifying our conceptual frameworks, and then day 2 start to come down to the ground and ask what are the implications of these cross-cultural conceptual conversations. So thank you for bringing to the table science and the examples that you did, because the question that now troubles me is this. We have quite a lot of scientific evidence about how to address certain aspects of the climate crisis. And we have deniers of climate change, of global warming, of all sorts of things, like we have deniers of vaccine efficacy and safety and other things. what do we do as leaders of, well, I'm not a leader of a religious tradition, so I can talk to you as an outsider. What do you all do if scientific evidence about what we should do comes into conflict with sets of religious values? For example, some genetically modified food is actually protecting the environment. It requires less resources and it can feed more people while exploiting less of what the planet needs to protect, or what we need to protect. So what happens, for example, if a practice that is good for the environment comes into conflict with religious values? And I want to offer two scenarios. One is authentic, deep respect for cultural values that would actually mean we need to limit our application of this scientific evidence, or using cultural values to persuade, to increase adherence, even to the point of manipulating populations into adherence based on scientific evidence. And sometimes these two cannot coexist. So our ethical commitment to using the evidence in hand to actually protect the planet, the biosphere, etc., versus our ethical commitment to authentically respect cultural values when they clash with this. I know where I stand from a secular perspective, but I really hope we'll have this conversation in an honest way.
Okay, anyone wants to respond to that? David has something to say. Yeah. And something else. Something else? Are there any, is this a question directed to someone or just a comment?
I'd love to hear responses.
Okay, responses from anyone else? Only, I think John has some, John and Chris are basically very passionate about these topics.
I would like to hear Jonathan's answer from his perspective as well. I just wanted to find out if he had something to add on that question.
Do you have something to say to the, were you able to understand the question posed by Wadid? Well, he's off.
Oh, okay. Oh, there he is.
I have a problem with hearing what you all say, because there are echoes when people say. So I don't hear clearly. I just hear some words, some phrases.
Okay.
Are you?
It's choppy. We can't hear you very well. I think it's probably the connection. So, okay, let's say, how do we do this? We don't have much time. Can you send me a WhatsApp? I can post it on the, or can you, are you connected to either to the chat? Oh, okay. Any other response? Colin, you want to say something about that? Or
I mean, that's the world I live in every day. Can we or can't we do something?
Well, okay, basically, John and Chris, quickly. We're both see.
The whole thing about science gets very complicated.
Right.
Hello. Yes. Is it working? Yes. Yes. Science is pretty complicated. In a way, science is like a philosophical thing, and there are many philosophical, or at least a few philosophical commitments, metaphysical commitments that science implies. And in a sense, it's properly considered in the same breath as religion in some capacity. It's different from technology. You know, you can distinguish two kinds of technologies. Technologies of things like computers, and technology that's supposed to be applied to living things. And living things turn out to be orders of magnitude more complicated for technological solutions, and even for scientific speculation and theory. So I think that it is an important discussion that we should have, and I'm going to address it tomorrow very briefly. But I don't think it's so facile. I don't think it's like there's science over here and science says truth, and over here is religion, and we don't know what religion says, but science is the best way to understand reality, and therefore science trumps religion, or science trumps other kinds of ways of looking at reality. I mean, religion is not the only way to look at reality. Taoism is a way of looking at reality. Samkhya is a way of looking at reality. Aristotelianism is a way of looking at reality. And these are complex, very sophisticated ways of evaluating reality that in many ways are more powerful than the scientific metaphysics, because scientific metaphysics reduces life to the mechanical, materialist, physicalist realm. So and that's because we live in an enlightenment world. Okay, no more comments.
Okay.
Could I say something?
Sorry, Jonathan, can you answer the, okay, you want to respond to that or?
Yes, so I object to the use of scientific metaphysics. I'm talking about the scientific method, which is at the heart of enlightenment, which is not on par with religious beliefs, which unveils facts, empirical facts about reality. And we're all sitting here today living to be 80 some years old using the technologies that we do because of science. So I object to the whole framing. And I think that this is the point where the rubber hits the road, and we're going to have some really difficult conversations because we frame reality very differently, and it's becoming difficult to build the bridges and have the common ground and the common language to talk about it.
Well, part of the problem is that that science is and implies a metaphysics and an ontology. It's not simply an epistemological activity, and the ontology is materials. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand the history of ideas, because that's where the Enlightenment comes from. It's a reduction in the Enlightenment processes. Life becomes reduced to a mechanistic thing. The ontology is materialistic. So you can't say there's no ontology in science because you're begging the question. There is an ontology in science, and anybody who studies history of philosophy or history of the philosophy of science will understand that.
Okay.
Okay, I don't want to manipulate the conversation. Right. This was just to open up the topic for the next 2 days.
Okay, sure. Okay, it's a big topic. Let's see. I think Jonathan was answered Wada's question.
Yeah.
Before, yes.
Sorry, because of the limitation of my my situation, I can't hear clearly what people said, but I can see clearly what they write to me through the chat room. The question is, what happens when using scientific evidence to protect the environment comes into conflict with religious values? Well, I think when science and religions are in conflict, only when they are both asserting some conflicting, making some conflicting factual claims. And I think science, well, as I understand science, science making factual claims, where used, I don't think it will conflict with factual claims, because they're two different things. As for the Confucians, I don't think the Confucian and science will have conflict. For the Confucian, I think science is a tool that we need to use to help people to improve the world situation and so forth. So from the Confucian perspective, I don't think there are conflict between the Confucian values and science. But I don't know. Well, I don't know other religions. Maybe most Islam and Christianity might have problem with science in some areas, which I don't know.
Sorry, we can't hear you very well. It's a very choppy. Sorry. It's a poor connection.
Pardon me?
We can hear you really well. It's choppy connection, yes, from your end. Okay, can we move to Chris and David?
And you also have Lucita and
David, and then Lucita. Who's next?
And Paul also had his hand up.
But you have a different question. Is this?
It's directly related to your
exactly.
question
So
and
still the
to John's
questions and then-
comment.
Right, and then I will go.
So, thank you. I'm going to try to be brief. What?
No, I mean,
I think,
okay, 5 minutes.
it's good that John went first because I'm sympathetic to both of you here. So I'm going to try to be very brief. I think that before we can answer your question, we have to recognize, yes, the history of science and the history of ideas, John. I think the way in which we understand epistemologies and ontologies is very important. And we have to be upfront, however each one of us or anybody is going to answer about our ontological presumptions, before we give an answer. And we have to explore in the same breath the fact-value relation, right? Not to conflate facts and values, but not to make the distinction between them so, the chasm between them so far that there's no over. There's that third circle where the way in which we find facts, right, is oftentimes determined on what we value, right? Why are we asking that question? Because it's an empirical question in the first place. So the values always kind of creep in. And we can talk about this in the medical realm, a biotech realm with genetic modification. The whole idea of facts-based, evidence-based medicine, values-based medicine, values-based science, facts-based thinking. There's some overlap. So I think that's an important thing to recognize. And on that level, right, I'm sympathetic to John's general criticisms of materialism. And I think that in science, there's things like organismic science, right? Ways in which the fact-value distinction is taken into consideration, right? Where neither the religious nor the quote-unquote scientific is always looking at each other at odds. So I'm going to end on, we need to answer that question from a holistic approach. The term empirical comes from empirikos, sorry, I'm going to, right? Empirikos means experience, and there's different modes of experiencing reality. And once we, get into the etymologia, the etymology of the term, and we understand that, I think we can have a more fruitful conversation where empirical, moral, contemplative, and other perspectives can be in dialogue. And what that's going to require is a willingness to engage, right? And a willingness to engage and not just try to have, some kumbaya consensus or, duke it out, but really engage so we can have a fruitful answer to that. And I'm going to end on that. A science engaged theology is what I've been doing for the past 2 years, and it's that willingness to find those, to explore all those little realms that I was saying. I know it was kind of, John and I are both verbose people. Sorry.
You're a great peacemaker.
Okay, I think you two can sit at lunch together, and then I think
I'm going to sit between you two.
So I have a quick clarifying question for Jonathan, but I can't resist this conversation. So I want to say real quickly, a really neat thing about science is if you go to a science lab, you find people of all different religions and none. And the beaker either turns pink or it turns blue. The rockets go up or they don't. The glacier is getting smaller or it isn't. So I think if there's a conflict between religion and science, somebody's making a category error because they shouldn't conflict, because scientism in materialist ontology is different than science. And so, okay, I'm done. Jonathan, my quick question, if you can hear me, is you said, I'll do that.
Because it feeds out of this microphone.
Hey, Jonathan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay, great. You said anthropocentrism does not give moral standing to non-human creatures, but you said an anthropocentric person could have a moral obligation to them. And I didn't understand how something without moral standing could confer a moral obligation. I see those two things as implying one another. And so I was just curious about how you were using those terms.
Well, you said that I have a notion of anthropocentric person. Is that right?
Yes, that's what he was referring to. Yes.
But I don't have that notion. What I have is the notion of the self, and that self is not anthropocentric.
Jonathan, it's the slide that you use. I think David is referring to the slides that you use about anthropocentric conferring the no moral application. You have to refer that to one or two slides that you used.
About what? About anthropocentrism, right?
I have the same thing.
The specific question is, how can someone not give non-human nature moral standing, but still feel a moral obligation to it?
Okay.
Isn't having a moral obligation just to say something has moral standing?
Well, I think from the Confucian perspective, the moral standing we give to the nature or other forms of life, or even the ecosystems, Earth, is because we adopt a doctrine of the unity of man and heaven, and we take these things as part of us. So because of this, we extend our moral concern to those things. Do I answer your question?
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, all right, Masita.
But I think it is important to understand these things, because the notion of the self is important in Confucianism. Well, my understanding of the confusion of the self is the notion of the large self, which I have talked a little bit in my presentation, and I have discussed it in my paper.
Yes, I understood that the universe is part of you from the large self point of view. Yeah. So I mean, I wanted to just talk about damage and harm, because we were discussing this in the break. Damage, from my understanding, is the short-term damage we can do to one organism or a few organisms or a part of the planet. Whereas harm would be harm to the whole system, like the collapse of a whole ecosystem or the collapse of a river hydrology system or something like that. That's my understanding. So as human beings, I think we would find it very hard to damage the whole of the hydrology of a whole region. Might be possible if enough human beings damage the environment in the same time, in the same way. But I think damage is something we can do. We can cause damage to other organisms or a group of organisms. But I think in terms of stopping the sun shining, stopping the moon shining, stopping the large systems from functioning, I think it's very hard for humans to harm nature. And we are more likely to be harmed first, I think. So I'm interested in the way that Confucianism would describe how do you nourish the larger self. That's what I think, how you talk about it. So you talk about nourishing the larger self. So how does Confucianism do that? How does it encourage that?
Yes, yes.
Jonathan, did you get the question? How does Confucianism nourish the larger self?
I think it is a kind of practice that the Confucians advocate. the Confucians ask us to restrain to ourselves, to act according to the principle of Ren and the principle of Yi, and those things. And through practicing these principles or developing these kinds of virtues, then we are able to extend our sympathy or our moral concern to other things. So you ask how, I think it is practice.
Jonathan?
Yes.
Dennis Chang here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you very much. I like your paper, and I like the distinctions between moral standing and moral significance. I just want to ask you about your views about the Confucian concept of 人性, the humanity in human beings, and whether you see in it a principle of universal application, so that you can apply the larger principle, that you can be a larger self, as it were.
Yeah, well, I think it is a very complicated question. You can write a whole book to talk about the Confucian view about human nature, right? For one thing, I think for the Confucians, we all have the potential to develop our moral characters to this extent that we become a humane person. I think that is the important nature we have according to the Confucian.
Yes, thank you. There's just one more question. You know that Confucius says, or at least as interpreted by Mencius, that where there is a thing, there must be a norm. That is, 有物必有者, 有物必有者. Now, can you again sort of apply that from human realm to the entire cosmic order?
I think this can be understood from a different perspective. You can understand this from a scientific perspective, okay? If you understand this from a scientific perspective, then we have to appeal to science. For example, we have to appeal to some physical law or biological law and so forth. But we can also understand this from a metaphysical point of view. Then it depends on this metaphysical view, or what this metaphysical view is. And I think the Confucians will have some sort of holistic pictures about the things in the universe. But the humans, I think, have certain sort of nature which is different from the animal. So the Confucians would say we are distinct in that sense. But at the same time, the Confucian also regard animals or some other things have certain sort of nature which reflect the Tao of the heaven that we have to respect. This is a metaphysical view. I think 有物必有则 we can understand this sentence from this perspective.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think time's up for us. Now we have to head out to the Chulalongkorn University, and so